everyone, and welcome to a very international version of the Winging It F1 podcast. I'm Adam Dickinson in Oklahoma, the United States of America. That's Nigel Chu in Barcelona, Spain, and that's Freddie Coates in Sheffield, England. So we're all in different countries. It's very exciting. Nigel has managed to get in the corner of his room that has great hotel Wi-Fi for hopefully the duration of this podcast, but if not, you'll find out in about 15 minutes time. How are you, Freddie?
5 seconds.
I'm great, Alan. Thank you for asking. I mean, I'm jealous of Nigel's free trip to Barcelona, but you know, beggars can't be choosers, I suppose.
Are you a beggar?
I'm
not a beggar. I mean, when I was walking through to get to my hotel, I was thinking about begging because I didn't. It was a bit scary because there was no one there and it was proper dark. I didn't really know where I was going. But I'm here now, so that's all pretty good.
Yeah,
I agree. It's, you know, that's the joy of podcasting is we know you got here. If you'd like recorded a snippet before you got off the train, then like there'd be some suspense. But now we know, we're glad we can relax. We can talk about the Imola Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend, and I'm not going to try and say the long name because I didn't get it before I started reading this. So it's got a million names. It's got Rolex, it's got Made in Italy, it's got the fancy name for the region. Oh yes, there we go. The Formula One Pirelli Gran Premio del Made in Italy de Emilia Romagna Rolex 2021.
They've had a Rolex.
The Imola weekend.
Oh, wow. San Marino Grand Prix. It's no secret on this podcast that I love Imola, so I'm excited as per. But...
Yeah, and there's a sprint race this weekend. So
yeah, fun, I guess. Kind of weird, different, just different. I like different.
Nigel?
I don't know. I think my thoughts on the sprint race haven't changed from last year. I still think if everyone's going to use a different format, they should use something that's better and a bit more exciting, because I think having something that's effectively just the first stint of a main Sunday race isn't the best thing. But it is different. Like Freddie said, we've got it 3 times this year out of the 23. Whether Imola's the best track to do it at, I'm not sure. But it could. So it's going to be interesting, not necessarily exciting, but interesting.
I mean, what do you think there should be like a reverse grid race, or that'd be more exciting?
I think
I'm not sure. I think I wrote ages ago a formats piece thing about F1 using different formats. I can't remember what I said in it, but I just think little things like having a proper top 10 shootout with cars going out one by one at some races and like at Monaco and stuff like that. Perhaps having races where there's no pit stops or races where you have to use all 3 compounds of tyres. I'd rather see that than a sprint race personally.
Yeah, I think it becomes hard to sort of walk that line because you get these things like you say, like a pursuit kind of knockout system or different kind of strategy sort of challenges. That's all cool and well and good, but it's kind of like you got to take what you've got, and what they've got is cars that can't really do that, cars that are designed to do a Grand Prix. So unless you just completely change it and make it not Formula One, I think it's very hard to kind of do something that isn't just a shorter F1 race if you want to then just add on to it. Either way, or you just go the whole hog and do a qualifying race on a Saturday and a qualifying race on Sunday, a la Formula E or a la BTCC or whatever, I don't know, DTM I should say, not BTCC, and just do that kind of thing. I think that would be just an easier thing. If they want to just add more to a weekend, just do 2 races. But I think it's ballsy to do the sprint at Imola. It's very ballsy to do the first one with the 2022 cars at Imola. Obviously it was planned to do that before we saw the cars in action, but I think everyone's been very happy with them. They've been talking about, oh no, they're racing too well. So just who knows what we're going to get, really. And I'm still open to it because I think as a format, I think it's not the worst format we could have. And I think it is all right. And I still am of the belief that put race drivers in race cars on a racetrack and they will race. I think these cars are going to help that much more than last year's cars, which is obviously where the sprint's failings came in, was, you know, super high downforce cars that can't follow each other.
I mean, kind of where I stand on it is, yeah, I don't think the sprint race is perfect, but it's not, we don't lose qualifying to get it. We lose a practice session. So you know, you're going in, you have the qualifying on Friday, which I really, really liked last year. You know, the Silverstone qualifying was just fantastic in, you know, sunny evening in the summer in Northamptonshire and 2 of the counties. And I like that. And then, you know, all the races where there was a sprint race had more exciting races than, you know, I guess the average.
I mean, that was per chance, really, to be fair.
No, but, you know, I don't think it didn't kind of sledgehammer the racing action, which is, you know, kind of was my worry, or that, you know, it would be dull, and it wasn't. So that's 3 things to go off, and, you know, by the end of the season we'll have more, and we'll kind of be able to draw more of a conclusion from it. But based off what we saw last season, I don't see any reason not to kind of, you know, carry on with it for the moment. And again, at the end of this season, then we can reevaluate that.
Do you think 3 races is enough then?
I think so. I think while they're still, you know, kind of getting to grips with it, and, you know, it's the supplementation to F1. You know, it's changing up some of it. I don't think they need to go for the whole thing straight away. So, you know, I don't kind of have an issue with them easing it in and seeing how it lands before kind of rolling it out over the whole season. If that's what their plan is, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where the other ones are this year. I think it's is it Austria and Interlagos? Yeah. So, I mean, I was kind of okay with him doing 5 or 6, to be honest. I think it adds more kudos to the sprint format if you have more of them anyway, because people can say, oh no, you've got these, for at least for 2021, like 3, 2, 1 points. Adding to the championship makes it kind of gimmicky. But if you have lots of them with more points on offer, I think it makes it definitely something worthy of the championship adding to it. Gives them more interest as a sole sort of entity. But I don't know. Obviously, we've got 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as the points this time around. We'll get onto that, I'm sure. But I think obviously the reason why we've only got 3 is because the teams think it's going to be too much money to just have as a kind of a jeopardy kind of scenario where you have too many racing scenarios and so on. But it's kind of like, well, it's a hard one because they can crash in practice and crash in qualifying, but obviously it's more opportunity, more probability of crashing in wheel to wheel. So it really depends. I think I was surprised F1 weren't able to force through to at least 5 or 6 for this year, to be honest. But
yeah, same. Yeah, I think that the fact they couldn't leads to a much bigger problem but something that we've had for 10, 15, 20 years, that the teams have far too much power, and it's just got even worse and worse. And the fact they can't even have 6 sprint races just shows that, quite frankly. So, you know, is what it is. But yeah, that's another story.
Yeah, there's a whole thing with Ross Brawn going on about that you've got to save the teams from themselves, and it's true in that regard. Yeah. I mean, it's a wider context, but there's a phrase I seem to remember from an entirely different topic, but the same sort of theme, which is kind of like I don't know, actors trying to get involved in sort of script running and that kind of thing of TV. It's like the sort of phrase from a producer's side is, "Don't let the lunatics run the asylum." So the team shouldn't be making the rules for what they compete in. They should be competing in a sort of objective, neutral kind of rules decision. But obviously, like you say, all rules in Formula One are subjective rather than objective. So it's the mess and weird and funky world that is F1, which is why it's kind of fun and niche in a way. But
yeah, it's not perfect, but that's part of the reason that we like it. I like Imola as the choice as well, because I think it will be different to what we saw last season from the tracks, and it will kind of give a different side to the sprint race. And hey, if it's bad, then we don't need to go to tracks like Imola for the sprint race again, and that's fine. We can move on. But yeah, I think it will be interesting. And I think because it's a track that's difficult to race at or overtake at, but it's not Monaco, or it's not it's not just kind of physically impossible. It's challenging. So yeah, I think we'll see ballsiest drivers rewarded. Maybe we'll have to see, but I'm looking forward to it. Anything else to add from either of you?
Yeah, it's a fantastic track.
In my mind, there's a kind of rule of thumb in sort of racecraft in that we've obviously had 2 races at Imola with modern cars. Old-fashioned cars now, but with kind of modern era Formula One. And yeah, the racing wasn't great in 2020. That's fairly obvious. But there were dices. In 2021, in the wet, it was kind of like there were some really good scraps in that race, and obviously the storylines around it get sort of thrown in. The red flag, Hamilton's mistake, Norris's podium, Russell and Bottas, exactly. And there was some really good just racing in that race, and kind of if you take it as a kind of really weird rule of thumb, it's kind of like the cars are closer this year to how sort of last year's cars were in the wet, really. It's sort of driver sort of skill getting closer and so on. So it's kind of like maybe this is quite an optimistic view, but you could get some good dices around this track. You got opportunities for lots of different lines into Tosa and Villeneuve and so on, and maybe even sort of moves going up into Variante Alta or maybe Ravazza, that kind of thing to keep close. So there could be some okay racing at Imola potentially, because we had okay racing at Melbourne. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I think Imola as a track, for me, it's one of my favourites. I'm so glad F1 returned there a couple of years ago, and it's going to stay on the calendar till 2024. So if we do get great racing, I think that's just a bonus, because I think the cars, the speed they're doing over the chicanes is just incredible. Also, like jumping over the curves, trying to shorten it, the elevation changes through the middle sector, and then you're big on the brakes into the second to last corner. It's got a track that's got pretty much everything. So I think if any country's going to have 2 races, then Italy is probably the country. Because Imola is just one of many great tracks. And yeah, like Freddie said, I think we're going to see even better racing than we saw last year. And last year we got quite a bit of good racing there. So yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, check out our last podcast. A couple of podcasts ago, if you want to hear Nigel's views on America having 2 or more races. Yeah, I really like him. I think it's up there as possibly the most beautiful tracks on the calendar, especially when they had it in 2020 when it was in autumn. That was just stunning. It's really pretty. Yeah, I think still just have to wait and see about the how the racing itself is going to be. But I'm optimistic with these new cars. I think they seem to have taken a big step forwards, and we'll see. I guess Imola will be the biggest challenge so far for that, and we will talk about that on Monday or whatever as to whether the cars handled that or how the cars handled that. So,
fingers crossed.
Moving on to one of the drivers who will be hoping and one of the favourites to take victory at Imola, Max Verstappen, and Helmut Marko has been talking to the Express, and he's a bit more critical than I might have expected of his young driver, his young world champion, and saying that he goes over the limit too much and that they thought a world championship title might bring calmness to him, but he might need another world title before he can go into qualifying with too much pressure. So there's interesting comments from the distinguished Helmut Marko. Nigel, do you think he's right?
I think to an extent, yes, but I also don't think Verstappen is driving any worse or better than his first 3 or 4 races from last year, because I think people forget from Monaco onwards, which was I think round 5 last year, he was outstanding. But before that, season opener in Bahrain, when he was overtaken out and he went off the track by making that small mistake there, and then got out qualified by Perez in the second round last year. Same thing happened this year. And then in Portimao, he was quite scruffy, which was the 3rd round last year as well. And in Australia and Bahrain, Leclerc was probably the better driver, just like Hamilton was the better driver than Verstappen last year. So I don't think Verstappen is driving. I think it's always very similar to last year. It's just some people forget that Verstappen did make a few mistakes early on, and then he went on to be, quite amazing, really. But I think Marko is right to some extent. I think Verstappen is always trying to find the limit of the car almost, and the car doesn't quite suit his style. But it wouldn't surprise me if in, say, by Spain or Monaco, or even this weekend, we see that half-second margin to Perez, and then that stays for most of the season. I think it's just a case of when Verstappen finds that groove, just like last year.
I think from my side, it's the comments seem to be a bit odd. I think they're kind of comments that would be perfect in sort of a latter end of the season, kind of championship fight kind of time. It's kind of like, say, you have a situation, it's an old hypothetical, but say, like, obviously Max is just pushing Lewis off the track in Brazil in 2021. That's a kind of stressful, clinging on, desperate move. I think we all agree into of racecraft. If he was doing that kind of thing in a championship fight after he had a title under his belt, say he did that kind of move this year or next year, if he's in a fight for a championship, then you can sort of say, oh, maybe with a world championship, you think he can be a bit calmer. But I kind of feel like the pressure isn't from Max. The pressure is elsewhere. He's retired from 2 races when it hasn't been his fault, and the only one he's completed, he's won. So really, you look at it from that perspective and kind of think, it's not really Max's self imposed pressure that's harming the results. It's mechanical. So I think Max is doing all right, to be honest.
I kind of, and particularly like saying the problems with qualifying, I find that really interesting because Max he's such a good qualifier, and he seems to be, to me, from the outside, and obviously Marko sees him in a lot more detail than any of us do, but to me it seems like, he can go in with the right level of pressure or I guess, he can have the adrenaline to really push himself to the limit in qualifying, but he does it consistently and he does it very well. And I think kind of this is similar to what you were saying, Freddie, that it's, where people would level criticisms at him last year for kind of being too intense or going over the limit was in the races. People weren't really, bar maybe Saudi qualifying was the only time where, people were criticizing that. But, it didn't seem to be there. So I find it interesting, as someone who sees him much more up close on race weekends than we do. I think it's an interesting comment for him to make. But I also agree that, I don't really see a change from last year, but I guess he's also saying he was like this last year and we thought that might just calm him down.
I can't help but feel that if Verstappen hadn't retired from those 2 races and he was second in the championship, Marko wouldn't be saying this. I've got. I don't know why I think that, but I think it's just because there's a lot of frustration at Red Bull at the moment, and rightly so, because the DNFs that they've had are not acceptable, really. So, I think there's just a lot of frustration, and I think Verstappen doesn't need to be told. I think Verstappen knows himself if he's performing at his best and stuff like that. And Verstappen has already admitted that he's not 100% happy with the car. So I think over the next few races, that will probably change, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Helmut Marko loves to control the narrative, doesn't he? So I think it's just that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if you look at kind of the gap in qualifying so far, it's not been where you'd expect, or where it was last season. And, I think Perez has improved with more time in the car, but you'd still kind of expect Verstappen to be kind of further ahead, although Freddie, you're motioning like you disagree with that.
Well, I think it's a mixture of kind of, I don't think it is Verstappen qualifying badly. I think it's Perez qualifying well and Verstappen qualifying well as well. But on top of that, it's a car that suits both drivers rather than a car that suits Verstappen, I think there's been a bit of talk really. The car really is favoured away from Verstappen's perhaps chosen sort of handle the back end, pointy front end style of driving, and that there's a bit more kind of stability for Perez's preferred style of driving, which is a more ordinary way of setting up a car, to be honest. So I think it's really just actually the traits. I think it's showing Verstappen in a very good light, because it's proved that he's actually quite adaptable to it, because he's still doing very well in a car that's really not the car that's been developed underneath him, if that makes sense. So I think he's doing all right, in my opinion, and I think Perez is doing okay too. So I kind of I wouldn't be surprised if what Nigel predicted doesn't come true, where Perez is half a second back come Barcelona or Monaco. I would be more surprised with that kind of scenario. I think they're both going to progress through and just get to know the car well themselves anyway.
I think you got to credit Perez as well, because he most of the season last year he was behind. Yeah, he has that mentality to come back in the winter, and he's still performing very, very well. So that experience that he's got, that is the difference with Perez. To be able to put Verstappen's outstanding performances to one side and perform himself. And I think there's almost a myth in F1 about teams making cars to suit certain drivers or to suit one half of the garage. I think the team tried to make the car as possible, and it's up to the driver to adapt. And if it suits them, it suits them. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then the best ones can adapt, and that's where we'll probably see Verstappen at his best.
I don't think that's true. I think the teams do build the cars not for one driver, but they build the cars and they get the feedback and they get a directive point of view, and they build the cars with the drivers, not for one driver. And I think that's why we've got Red Bull in a position this year where both drivers can drive the car, and why in previous years it was more pointed towards the one kind of contracted continuous driver. I disagree that it's a myth. I think it is a thing. And you go back all the way through to Schumacher and people like that. Those cars are designed for people to drive. But anyway, that's a whole different kettle.
Yeah, I think I come down between, I guess, in the middle of what both of you said. I think F1 fans over exaggerate it. There's all kinds of myths. If you look over F1 history or just the last few years, there's kind of all types of myth about teams kind of, favouring drivers or building a car for one driver or the other, or, kind of. And every year there's, people who complain either publicly or privately that they're kind of not being favoured in the car development or kind of as the car goes through the season. But I think kind of especially before the season, it makes sense for teams to, kind of see a team in Red Bull's position, to see that they've got one driver who's going to be, Max Verstappen world champion and will be their competing driver for the world championship, and one who, it's not as important that they're the fastest they can be every race, because, Sergio Perez is a fantastic driver, but all due respect, he's not Red Bull's choice to be competing for world champion. So I think I come in the middle where, there's people overhype it every year, but it does. Oh, the sneeze ruined that. But, I think there is a factor at play. Nigel.
Well, I didn't have a point to make. I'm going to stand by my point. I seriously think the teams make the fastest cars, and this is whether the driver can adapt to it. I think it's that simple. I think people overcomplicate it.
I agree with you. Teams make the fastest cars, but the way to make the car fastest is to combine that with the driver. Because the best way for a car to be fastest is to make sure that it's tailored to what makes the driver perform best.
Yeah,
I think we're both right. That's the thing. In the core of what we're saying, but I just don't think. I think you're wrong if you think teams just build a car and say get in it. They haven't done that since the 1970s.
Yeah.
Maybe if
perhaps. I think you're more right. I think you're more right than me.
Okay. So you're just gonna just be wrong. That's a fun time for the podcast. just fight the corner of something that's not right. No, I'm sorry. Sorry, Nigel.
Yeah,
It's fun to disagree again. We haven't disagreed on anything in ages. We keep agreeing on things.
Well, we have just not from F1. Actually, no, we've not.
Yeah, I didn't want to go on a date with you, Nigel. Sorry.
Oh, they're clearly missing a lot out here. Yeah, so we'll see how Verstappen goes this weekend. Do you think he can challenge Leclerc?
No.
I think no. I think unless it's wet. If qualifying's wet, then I think Verstappen and Hamilton and Russell probably. If it's wet, I think Mercedes can come into it because of their car. But I think if it's a dry weekend, fully dry, I think Leclerc has to be favourite. I think the only thing that can stop him is the fact that we've got two standing starts rather than one with the sprint. So it's going to be difficult. And if Leclerc can get 33, 34 points, then he's going to have a huge lead after this weekend.
In my thinkings, this track favours Ferrari more than any of the ones we've been to so far. There's slower corners here. There's more sort of variety. And if you know, the subset of what we've had so far, the kind of speedy kind of Melbourne Jeddahs, and for the most part Bahrain as well, fast corners, those are really, you know, they're good for Ferrari. But where Ferrari is really making the time up, particularly in Barcelona, was the slow bits. So with corners like Gravazza, like Tamburello, and Tosa, which are, you know, they're medium to low speed corners. They're not high speed corners. I mean, I know a lot of Imola is really fast, but it's narrow, which kind of helps it feel fast. It's a bit of a roller coaster, but there's some tight, narrow corners, slow corners, which will lend itself to the Ferrari more. So really, even if Leclerc's the favourite and that kind of thing, he's got to be followed by Sainz this weekend, really, because otherwise Ferrari haven't maximised it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they're the out-and-out favourites, and there's going to be one on the track that favours them most throughout the season. I'd go as far as to say, and especially now where, you know, Red Bull have got ground to make up anyway, Mercedes aren't a factor in the fight for the front, then it's just, you know, bar rain, there doesn't, Leclerc went there too. There doesn't seem to be much that I can see kind of stopping them. And, you know, again, like I think it's a very real possibility that Ferrari have a 1-2 here, and then the standing start becomes a bit kind of less relevant. The two standing starts become a bit less relevant, I think, Nigel.
I think as well, with just one practice session before qualifying, if it is dry, that'll help Ferrari even more, because Mercedes and Red Bull seem to have a car that's slightly harder to find the operating window, whereas the Ferrari can get up to speed quickly. It's versatile, so that will only play to Leclerc's and Sainz's hands as well. So everything points to Ferrari. It'll be a small surprise if they don't win.
All roads lead to Maranello, definitely. I completely agree. I think it's going to be interesting, because even if teams have wanted to bring upgrades, as you say, Nigel, there's one practice session. So what do? Bring an upgrade, it doesn't work, and go in blind? No, we're going to be seeing the cars we've seen. So it's going to be they'll be very hard to beat, Ferrari. Very hard to beat.
Do you think Red Bull will be the kind of clear second place team again, bar their engine?
I don't see any reason for them not to be, based on the sort of gap between best of the rest in qualifying in Melbourne, Lando Norris to the Red Bulls and Leclerc, and would have been Sainz as well had he been up there. There was a good 6 tenths in that gap. So on top of my head, might have been 5, but you know, that's a significant chunk. So even if they are, even if the race pace is a bit closer, as we saw with sort of the tyres between Hamilton and Perez last time out, and arguably a little bit of Alonso, but really they will have the track position to be the second best.
I think Alpine can be right up there with Red Bull and certainly Mercedes. I've got a funny feeling this weekend. We've seen them almost coming, and they've shown lots of potential in the first 3 races. I think Alpine could be a major threat this weekend, and I'd love to see Alonso, really challenging for the podium on genuine pace. I think he'd be really up for it as well after missing out in Q3 last time out because of that very annoying hydraulics failure when he couldn't change down gears at turn 12 or 13 or 11, one of them. So yeah, I think Alpine can be the surprise of the weekend.
I hope so. I think it'd be great fun to have Alonso up there scrapping. Alonso around Imola, just having a fight, just with a Ferrari, just even that's wishful thinking, but it's just something that I find cool.
It'd be a major throwback to before I was watching F1, so I wouldn't get the joke. But yeah, I think I do think Alpine are worth kind of more discussion because we were all quite down on them before the season, but they've come back and they've been, to me, the surprise of the season. And I think it was a tough weekend all round for Alonso last time, but I think he really could have been getting a major point haul in the top 5, and that would have kind of at the moment they're 5th in the championship, but I don't think that's representative of where they're at really, and kind of where given before the season we didn't rate them highly, where kind of do you think this has all come from that they're now we're talking about them potentially battling near the top of the grid?
I think we were just duped a bit. They didn't really show their hand in testing. They didn't really, but they were all they were happy. The vibe around that team wasn't bad. It was kind of like, yeah, it's all right, it's going well. Yeah, it's all right, it's going well. And you're a bit like, is it though? We don't think it is. And in
a French accent.
Well, yeah. Mostly it's Alan Permain who just chats to random people. So you got his kind of Enstone accent because he's been there since the day it was the first rock was placed for the factory. But they were happy in testing, and I just didn't get it. I thought, oh, come on, Alpine, get your head straight. But I was wrong, and fair play to them. They've got a good engine. They have got a good power unit in the back of that car. The numbers they're sort of touting is they're saying they think they're sort of 10 bhp off the best, and I don't know who they said the best was, but I think that basically puts them fractionally off the top of F1 speed, basically. So they're maximizing it. There was a point in 2020 where they did a few setup alterations and then really started finishing like 4th, 5th in most races because they realized they had a slippery car and they could do well with that. So baked into that sort of design process is top speed now. So I think that's what's helped them out. So I don't know whether this track will then help them. Maybe it's a similar thing to the Red Bull where they've gone more for top speed because that's something they've been lacking in the past. And that might not necessarily help them at Imola, but I think they've got, they've just done a good job, and it's about time that team's done a good job. And I don't know, I've gone on for a long time on that for something I don't really think I've added to with much, but yeah, there you go.
Just like this podcast. No, I think they've got a strong. I think they got a strong car. I think it's versatile as well. For the first 3 races, none of the if any midfield team has been consistent, it's been them. I think Ocon ran the updated package in Australia. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so they'll have to cut that development route. But I think they're a team that they seem like they've got a plan. I think they're one of the few teams that are going to bring some kind of upgrade this weekend as well. So if that works and it pays off, then I think they can be right there, certainly challenging Mercedes. They won't be too far away from Red Bull as well. So I think they just seem to have quickly understood the new tyres, the new car as well, with different aerodynamics and the technicalities of it. And at the moment, I'd have to say they're probably just about ahead of Haas, who had a flying start to the season. So I think Alpine will be almost happily surprised, because I think in the winter they were a bit worried that they were going to have a difficult season, but they should be quite happy with the base that they've got. And it seems like they've got lots of developments to come. And if they work, then they can definitely be top 4 team this year.
Yeah, and I think, again, we talked about this in the season preview, or I know I did in my voice message, that the driver line that they have is really competitive. So the package, the package has to be on par with the teams they're fighting, but it doesn't have to be kind of way above that, because in Ocon and Alonso, then they've got two fantastic drivers. We know everything that Alonso can do, and he should have had kind of a flagship result so far. And if you want to talk about, best of the rest, at the moment the Mercedes are ahead, but behind the Mercedes and the Red Bull and the Ferrari, it's Ocon right now. So I think there's a lot to come from the team, and maybe this weekend we'll be seeing it. And I just it's lots of reason to be optimistic about the team. And like you say, they just seem to have got kind of they seem to have got the basics and the engine and the tyres nailed. And whenever you do that, you're going to be near okay. Freddie.
All I will say, really, sort of my final point on this, is that it has been very much a one driver push, particularly in Melbourne. I mean, they were scrapping a lot together in Bahrain and in Saudi, so they were close there. But in Melbourne, it was very much Fernando seemed to have sort of 0.6 in hand consistently to Ocon. So I don't know if that's a one-off, but it's not a good weekend that for Ocon, and that's one of his worst weekends in a long time in F1. So he got a good result, but in terms of what he could have had in pace comparison, I think it was actually quite poor. So I think that's the only sort of red flag you could say to the project, because other than that, it's been pretty good and they've been doing very nicely. And I agree, they're two fantastic drivers. So I hope that was a blip for Esteban. It's not, and that he's right up there chipping at the heels of Fernando again.
To me, it's kind of, if that's the, even if that's not a blip and that is kind of indicative, maybe not 0.6 or whatever, but if that is indicative, and he still had 3 fantastic top 7 results so far, then that's positive. I would kind of spin that the other way, that if there is that kind of pace, if there is a pace deficit to Alonso, and Alonso's not being able to have 2 clean races out of 3 yet, then to me that just seems again, I think the best is yet to come, and that would indicate that as well. Anything else to add on Alpine?
Not from me. I want to see Alonso scrapping. I know he's great fun at the front, so get him there.
There's life in the old dog yet. Yes.
I think it's old Matador, he's Spanish, so pick up a Spanish thing. Dogs are universal. Anyway, one of the teams that I'm kind of interested to see how they go is AlphaTauri, and particularly Pierre Gasly, because he's had 2 great Imola rounds over his career so far. He's qualified top 5 both times, although he crashed out of the first race there. But I kind of still think they're decent, but I still think we're kind of yet to see that kind of flagship headline result from them. So I'm interested to see if it comes this weekend. I don't know if I'm entirely confident that they are, but it's a team that I'm going to be watching kind of, for better or worse through this weekend.
They've had a very quiet season so far. Compared to the other midfield teams, I can't help but feel they've hardly made the headlines, and I think this is one of the first times we've talked about them since Bahrain. We barely mention them, because it's not that they're not doing. It's not that they're doing badly. It's just I don't think they're doing as well as they perhaps thought. I think they were targeting that illustrious 5th place in the constructors, which they still haven't had, which they just missed out on last year. And it doesn't seem like they've had the car to do that at the moment. It does seem like they are towards the back end of the midfield, and that's probably why they're a bit disappointed. A bit like how we saw with Alfa Romeo last year. So I think AlphaTauri are almost in that position, at least for these first 3 or 4 races.
Oh, okay. I thought Freddie was going to say something.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I will say something. Sorry. That's a nice little bit of not anything happening. Podcasts aren't easy, kids. Anyway,
international, remember?
Yes, we're doing this in 3 time zones, so forgive us. But yes, I think AlphaTauri, you're right, it has been quiet. They've got 3 points finishes, and Tsunoda with 8th place in Bahrain and Gasly with the other two in the other two races. Obviously, Tsunoda's Saudi was a write-off because whenever they turned that car on, it just fell apart. But other than that, it's been just an existing season. It feels like sort of their Toro Rosso again. At least with AlphaTauri, they sort of risen up a little bit, but it feels like I seem to remember sort of what season was it? 2018 Toro Rosso. They were just not that good. And
Brendan Hartley year.
Yeah, the Brendan Hartley year where and it was just it's kind of like they both had some pace, but some not pace that year. And it kind of feels like this year it's kind of going to be similar. Sometimes there's pace, sometimes there isn't pace, and it just I don't know. It feels like the regulation change has kind of kept them in a plateau where they should have been in a steeper rise, in my opinion, which is a bit of a shame because you know the whole concept of AlphaTauri now is a sister team, not a junior team. I mean, great, sure, but you know, it's just not been great. It's just not been great, and I don't know. I just don't know. I'm sure they'll hopefully, like you say, Adam, they've seemed to just have knocked it out of the park at Imola in terms of pace previously. So hopefully they can do so again. It can be a sort of unlocking and understanding of that car, just all of the philosophies just working. Maybe it's just a bit better in different tracks because obviously tracks we know where Pierre did wonderfully last year, Zandvoort being one of them, where it's kind of like a bit more wiggly, a bit twistier. Maybe just characteristics haven't necessarily settled down for them yet because it's all been a bit medium to high speed. Maybe they need a bit more slower speed just to rise them up a touch. We'll need to see.
Yeah.
We have only had very limited variety, I'd say, of circuits so far.
I think, you know, the points they've picked up so far have been because you've had so many retirements from the top teams and kind of every race. I mean, Saudi had 3 retirements in 3 laps. So it's kind of, that's been where they're picking up points so far. They've not really been in the top 10 drivers on pure pace, I don't think, this season yet. So, but having said that, you know, I think they qualified, or particularly Gasly, just, you know, 2 races, but 2 times he's, you know, done very well at Imola in qualifying. So I think if there is a race for them to get back on track, then this is it. So yeah, I think by the end of this weekend, then we'll know more about them. So I think that's it from me, unless there's any drivers that you want to watch out for this weekend.
I want to speak about Haas. I want to see if Haas can put Melbourne to bed as an Esteban Ocon style blip and have some pace again, or whether, you know, that car's just proving to be a classic sort of Haas car where they don't really know what's happening with it. Because that's the only thing I can kind of think, because there seemed no reason for it to be so slow and, well, relatively slow in Melbourne in comparison, particularly to how it was in Saudi and Bahrain. So I just worry, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this, whether that's because they're having sort of, whether you think that's anything to do with previous Haas troubles where they just don't necessarily completely understand the whole car. But do we think that could be a case, or do we think that was a blip, or what are your expectations for Haas? A blip? I hope it's a blip.
I think Magnussen was ill, wasn't he, just before qualifying or on Saturday morning. So I think he didn't fulfil his full potential there. And Schumacher, I still think he's lacking a bit of confidence from that Saudi Arabia crash because that was he missed a race there. So I think confidence for Schumacher is the problem. I think the stuff I read from the team, they went the wrong way on the setup, a bit like Red Bull. So that's why they kind of fell back, and as the midfield is so closer than ever. I think that's why they fell from, say, the front of the midfield to the back. So I think Haas and Alpine, those are, for me, the 2 teams that can have a really strong weekend this weekend, because I think they've both got versatile cars. And I think Imola, being the track that it is, fantastic track, I think we'll see the strengths of both of those teams this weekend.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think with Schumacher, it's just kind of hard to tell where he was after the crash last weekend. So I'm kind of willing to give him a bit of a pass for that and hope that he can be back, you know, to himself this weekend. And I kind of agree. I think this is. I kind of feel optimistic for Haas, but equally not like certainty. I still think there's kind of questions about the team, and again, it's kind of we've had 3 races, and it's there's kind of nothing set, or bar a few things. There's not much set in stone. Yeah, so yeah, I'll be interested to see how they go. I think they'll be okay, but again, I think this is just going to be a kind of quite significant race in terms of telling us where they're at with it. So yeah, I'm on the fence. I'm not gonna
again.
Yeah.
Fancy Adam. On guard.
I think the final thing for me is I'm hoping we get to see a wet qualifying, because we've not had a wet session yet. This being the first European race of the year, it'd be quite nice to see something a bit different as well. And with it being a sprint weekend, I think the rain on Friday will spice things up even more. So that's something I'd like to see. And that could be, again, the only factor that can throw Ferrari off the perch, perhaps.
Let's see.
Let's see. And on that, it's time for me to get off the fence, because we need to make our predictions for this weekend that we are going to throw back to in the Imola Review podcast, because that's what we always do. We always make our predictions after we make them. So,
have we actually ever done it? Have we ever looked back and gone, oh, remember when Adam said Ferrari were going to get 7th and 8th in the French Grand Prix or whatever?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, we did it for the French Grand Prix.
Right.
We've definitely done it in the past, surely. We can't have done 120 episodes without referring to a previous one.
Well, maybe this
22 episodes, and we're doing it like 3 times.
Oh, there was that time I said Antonio Giovinazzi would get into Q3 in Zandvoort, and then he did. And you were like, that's never going to happen. I was like, yeah, well, it has happened, and I'm the best. And since then, I've held the mantra of sort of emperor of the podcast. So, because we haven't looked back at other ones, I've been able to continue with that reign. And
also, like, Nigel, you say 122 episodes, but we haven't made predictions on all of them. Less than 50% will have been previews. So,
I think it's more than likely that we'll have said something completely bonkers and just hoped. I
think it's more than likely that you will have, definitely. So, yeah, that's fake news from Nigel there. But now we've had enough time to stall and give our predictions. Freddie.
What are the questions for the predictions? We haven't stalled. I haven't even come up with anything. I don't even know what the question you're going to ask me.
Well, it's time now. Third? Yes.
Christ, all right.
You can start with who's going to finish first and second.
Alonso.
Yeah, I'm going to go the same. I'm going to go Alonso, I believe.
Oh, wow. None of us are saying a Red Bull. Interesting.
No.
That's a bit stupid, isn't it? That is a bit stupid not to say a Red Bull.
For our first... for our first predictions, like for our first episode before Austria in 2020, I don't think any of us said a Mercedes for the win.
Did we not?
What? Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure.
I thought it was something ridiculous like Vettel, didn't I? Anyway.
Yes, I think.
Freddie had short hair.
I didn't actually. I had long hair for that one. Anyway.
Right. all the barbers were short, so you didn't really have a choice.
Second place. I'm going to say second place, George Russell.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
I am going to wait for Nigel to say his second place.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm going to be boring and say Carlos Sainz.
You're so boring.
And then first place. Do we want to say it on? Count down and say it. Is that?
Yeah, let's do it on countdown. So we definitely don't have any delays. Let's do the countdown. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, right. 3, 2, 1. Leclerc.
Max Verstappen.
Really?
Yeah, why not? Let's say Verstappen, Russell, Ferrari podium.
Does the Ferrari garage get hit by lightning?
Maybe, yeah. Sure, maybe. I don't know. Hey, I don't have to give you reasons. I just have to give you names. Okay, I don't have to give you workings out. This isn't a maths exam.
Technically, we don't have to do anything. It's our own podcast. We choose to do this. And how many Red Bull engined cars finish the race?
All four.
Nice one, Nigel. High five.
I know.
I'm going 2.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
2-2.
But that's not
I'm
not
changing mine
completing
to 3. Sorry.
That's not completing the final lap, not the thing where if you complete whatever 90% of the race, then it counts as that's stupid. But yeah, I'm going 2. So, are there any other wild predictions that you want to make before we finish?
I will have fun watching the race.
Yeah. I forgot one last. This is the first Imola race that's had fans since it returned to the calendar. So I think to see the 100,000 fans plus will be absolutely fantastic. It could be like proper Ferrari to fill the atmosphere like we get at Monza. So I'm hoping the TV kind of shows that, because definitely in some of the races when Schumacher was at Ferrari won his 6 races at the San Marino Grand Prix, it was absolutely amazing. So I'm hoping we'll see with Ferrari, back at the front and Leclerc being there. Hopefully we get, a great atmosphere this weekend.
They're sometimes crazier in Imola than they are in Monza.
Nigel's prediction is there will be fans there. So before that's everything. Unless Freddie wants to jump in with anything. No, it's too late because I can do that because I'm host of the podcast. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back on Monday, probably, to review the race. And until that point, then goodbye.
Bye.
Adios.